Remain calm. You can do this. The Funhouse. Part 1. They smell fear. Come on. No. You have to come with me. Nope. You promised. No, I said I'd come with you. I don't remember saying anything about how far. Don't be a baby, Amos. I'd rather be a baby than stand in cramped lines. Nope. Thanks, though. Amber tugged at her hesitant companion's arm until, finally, rolling his eyes, he followed her to the flashing neon sign hovering above the corrals that led to the carnival house of mirrors. She ran ahead to secure their place in line, where she bobbed from heel to toes excitedly. She bounced on her tippy toes for a moment, trying to see to the front of the line. The energy dwindled as she looked back to see Amos standing outside the barrier, unmoved by her persistent plea. He was grinning at her with his hands in his pockets. He'd made his decision pretty clear. He wasn't following suit. Her smile was back faster than the blue fun could switch to the pink house on the sign standing at the mouth of the entryway. Fine, I'll go by myself, Amber laughed, tossing her sweater at him as she playfully raised a rebellious fist. Sounds great, he called back with a wave and a laugh. Fine, but if I get lost or murdered by some creepy Halloween character because you left me all on my own, in the dark, in a house of mirrors, I'm coming back to haunt you, my friend. She pointed a finger gun at him and launched a shot. Almost caught it at his heart and pretended to be injured, which rendered a laugh, which he considered a win. He watched as more bodies piled in around the little sparrow, until he could barely make out the tiny tattoo on her shoulder. It was temporary, in the same outline, shape, and colors as the one she'd placed on his cheek, from the twin tattoo stickers they'd bought from the 50-cent machine inside the grocery store earlier in their date. He rolled his eyes, reminding himself to scrub it off before football practice the next day, or he'd never hear the end of it. He watched the entrance chute until Amber had completely disappeared, and then limbered off to find a vendor selling elephant ears and the slushies they'd both decided they liked so much, but hadn't had in forever. They'd only been on 2 dates since they'd decided they liked each other, but Amos had a secret. He hadn't told anyone he did like her until everyone else started catching on to how cool she was. But he'd noticed her even back in kindergarten roundup, when she took the crayons back from a bigger kid who'd tried to nab them straight out of her hand. She hadn't gone to the teacher like most kids would have. Instead, she'd slapped his hand and told him to ask nicely and she'd be happy to share. And the whole time she said it, she glared at him until he was sure she was serious. He'd lowered his eyes to Amos's surprise. He even asked her if he could borrow a few. And when he asked, she'd offered the entire box nicely with a smile. Amber didn't remember doing it, but Amos couldn't have forgotten the interaction if he tried. He shook his head, still happy she hadn't seen how nervous he'd felt under the fake confidence that seemed to show up while he wore his leather jacket. He'd been so anxious over how to ask her to come fishing with him, but she'd made it easy, bargaining that she'd bring her dad's old sun hat and fishing poles if Amos would bring the cheap beer and the worms. He smiled again, thinking of how well the trip had gone, how much fun they'd had just listening to music and splashing around at the edge of the dock. His eyes strayed back toward the snaking funhouse line, suddenly feeling a sting of regret. Maybe I should go with her, he thought. He hesitated just long enough for a couple to step up to the vendor in front of him. He stepped back into line. It was too late. She was probably close to the front by now, and there was no way people would let him cut in line. It would be super lame for him to try anyway. He looked down at the armful of stuff he was holding. It was better he stayed behind anyway. She'd have more fun without having to lug these things around. A little backpack and the sweater she'd tossed him. Doesn't seem like much, but sometimes even the smallest little things can get in the way. He'd learned that in football. Amos fumbled with his wallet, pulling it out of his back pocket in time to step up and order what he'd come for. Another volley of screams rose up from somewhere in the carnival. Their echoes fell away just as fast as he cast the cash back at the man standing in the window above him. Amos smiled. He couldn't hear what the man said, but he waved and indicated the vendor should keep the change. They exchanged thank yous that were lost in the general noise and festivities, but he was sure they both got the gist. Amos turned around again to watch the line as he waited. He was sure Amber wouldn't be anywhere toward the back of it, so he let his eyes stray over the front of the creepy-looking entrance. What a waste of time, he thought, while part of him wished he'd gone for the simple fact that she was there and he was here. And if he'd gone, line be damned, they'd still be laughing and spending time together. Here you go, sir, the vendor piped through Amos's thoughts. He thanked the man and hurried to toss the sweater into the backpack before slinging it over his shoulder again. He accepted the oil-stained triple paper plate, overflowing with fried batter and coated in powdered sugar. With the other hand, he accepted the cardboard carrier containing their drinks. As he walked back down the hill, shouts and loud cries seemed to flow in from all sides. The carnival was picking up speed. Amos looked at his watch. It was just past 9. He'd promised Amber's parents, via her, that he'd have her home no later than 10:30. Apparently, she'd had to finagle to get anything past 10 sharp, so he felt specifically obligated to have her home on time to make a good impression. Amos popped in a small fragment of elephant ear and let it melt in his mouth as he continued down the hill to wait at the other side of the funhouse, where he assumed the exit was. He watched shadows while he passed. A river of them seemed to pass through a somewhat see-through tube leading from one room to the next on the second floor of the pop-up building. Silhouette after silhouette hopped one after another over its surface, turning the bright red tube to a shadowed maroon, until each occupant had moved on to be replaced by the next volley. Is it really a ride or adventure if you're staring into the person in front of you's backside? Amos laughed at the thought as he started to count the shadows. 1, 2, 3. He started counting figures, large and small. They were moving pretty quickly. He'd reached 15 before looking around for some place to sit down and wait for Amber more comfortably. A few yards away was an empty picnic table under a lone oak. That'll work, he thought. Amos sat and made himself at home, taking the backpack and the sweater off and laying them to the side as he basked in the bright neon sign flashing all around him. The words associated with each color had been imprinted over his mind. He pictured them lighting up with each shade. Fun house. Fun house. House fun. Fun house, all at once, as the colors came together. Amos watched happy carnivalers pouring from the exit laughing and squealing happily together. They flowed out in torrents, couples, trios, packs, and still no Amber. He looked at his watch again, frowning. 9:45 p.m. It would take about 15 minutes to get Amber home. He looked at the plate of barely touched elephant ear and waved away a fly before deciding to tear off another chunk and place one of the 3 plates over the top to protect it. Another volley of gleeful screams and cries rang out as the nearby zipper took off, lighting up the sky as it spun each individual cage around itself. "We should have just gone on that one again," he said to himself. "I should have just gone with her," he thought again, kicking himself as he checked his watch. 9:55. Amos felt a trickle of frustration and glanced anxiously around, trying to figure out if she was messing with him. Amber was known for being a bit of a prankster, so it wouldn't be outside of her nature. Maybe she'd gone through faster than he'd thought in the hopes of scaring him, and she didn't see him, so she went again. Or maybe she just jumped on another ride. He checked his cell phone to see if he had any texts. Nothing. She had her cell. Maybe she'd ditched out because she thought he had. He frowned at the idea. Maybe she called one of her friends or texted to see where they were at. The thought annoyed him. Amber wasn't like that. She would have at least shot him a message. He knew it. He tapped a finger against his pocket. So where was she? As if to answer his question, the front pocket of Amber's backpack lit up through the dark to blend in with the cascading neon colors as the rides lit the sky, flashing endlessly all around him. Amos hesitated, looking in all directions around him before unzipping the pocket. Her cell. It was here, with him. He looked around, frowning. Bodies ran this way and that, but none of them were Amber. He pulled her phone out at the risk of her coming back to find him with it in hand, and the screen lit up again. 2 messages, one after another. It was Rachel, Amber's best friend. "How's the date going?" "How's the date going?" Kiss face emoji and a winking one. While the phone was still in his hand, another slid in. "Are we still coming to get you at 11? Amos paused, then put the phone back in its place. That part was none of his business. His business, at the moment, was getting Amber back in time to secure a 3rd date in her father's good graces. As he tucked the phone away, he glanced up the knoll. He decided to get a closer look at the exit and entrance of the fun house just one last time before making his next move. Still no Amber. He let his eyes roll over the bobbing figures, tracing their features to come up empty. No Amber. As if to answer his indecision, an especially loud and familiar burst of laughter caught his attention. His heart picked up speed. Relieved over some positive direction, he followed his ears around the back of the funhouse again. Last minute, remembering the backpack he'd left to set with the lukewarm elephant ear and melting freezies, he shifted direction to the shadow of the oak tree. Through the dark, the tabletop looked more bare than before, and by the time he'd reached it, he could already tell what was missing. All Amber's things. The laughter picked up again, reminding Amos of where he was headed before he'd redirected. For the first time in his life, he left trash to the wayside for someone else to pick up. He was on a mission. As he ran up the small slope, he found a pack of squealing teens in a circle around the far side of the zipper. Sure enough, he'd been right. It was exactly who he'd thought. "Rachel! Have you seen Amber?" Amos cried. He even waved as he jogged up to meet them. Instead of their normal response, they all looked at him like he was covered in 3-day-old sun-dried milk. "Amber," he stated again, waving a hand in front of her face. "Have you seen her tonight? We were here together. She went into the House of Mirrors and..." I'm sorry. Benjamin, I have to interrupt here. The stream vanished. I fell out of the scene like a rock through a cloud. I watched it fading fast as lightning, leaving the impression of our final moments together heavy on my lids. I forced them open, blinking into the silence, waiting for my submission to questioning. "Go ahead," I prompted, annoyed. The vision had been so clear this time. I was really getting somewhere. The man in white pushed his round glasses up the bridge of his nose. This is progress, he assured. "You know, you've never brought up those specific details before in this case, so I have to ask this." He pushed up his glasses again. "Is Amos aware, at this point in the story, is he aware that he's unstable?" He looked down at his notes again before continuing, and then leaned in as if he'd seen something important. I frowned and sat up straighter on the cornerless chair I was currently slouched in. "What do you mean, does he realize he's unstable?" I spat. "What about any of what I just laid out screams he's unstable to you?" "Well, Miss Clayton's parents and friends and the community of Millbanks as a whole, according to the court statements." He read the bullet points off the page, swiping them out at me like a weapon. "It's the night Amber disappeared." It was true. Something had happened. And at this point, it was the only fact that I knew for sure. It felt like my entire life was unraveling again. I'd come here to try to explain that to someone familiar, but I'd obviously made a bad decision. Viper, don't tell him anything else. He isn't going to help you. The inkling crept in one ear and nestled. I shut my lips. "Sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to make sure we were on the right track." He rotated his hand in a circle toward me. "So then, go on, please. We still have 10 minutes, Ben. Do you mind if I call you that? Or do you want to stick with Amos?" "I don't care what you call me, Doc. I just want to figure this out so I can get back to my life." He tapped his pen on his chin before jotting a note. "So, start where you left off. What happens after Amos accosts Amber's old friends? Did you mention the idea that he had been away for a year at this point? At an all-boys school? He hadn't seen or talked to any of them since he left? Then suddenly shows up wearing their school jacket and bringing up a name that most of them had just finished grief counseling over." "No, I didn't happen to mention any of that because it's not how it happened." I clenched my fists around the accusation. It was nothing like what I remembered. And again, I didn't remember much. "Okay, so tell me your version, Benjamin. The more I know, the better I can help you get over this repetitive behavior. You see, these things, they're kind of like a storm. They don't happen all the time. They brood and brood and brood, and then, at their boiling point, the clouds burst, pour, dump, pound, and unleash, sometimes lethal forces, all at once. The doctor nodded at his own statement, as if the action confirmed his wisdom. So, if we can unleash little bursts like this, like right now, when you're talking to me, and we can work through these details like we are, that's how we prevent buildups, Benjamin. You know that you're susceptible to these things, though, and that's a help. So by coming here, you've proven that training worked. It has to be nice to be able to trust some of your instincts anyway. You know when you're feeling out of control, so to speak. That's a good starting point. He nodded at me, as if hoping I'd nod along. I didn't, but I was listening. So tell me, what happened after you approached her friends, Amber's friends? So that's it, Doc. That's the end. That's all I can bring up without getting these horrible headaches. I could have sworn a smile flashed through his eyes, but it was gone in a blink. My anger rose up at his smugness. So that's where everything goes black, I guess, and I just lose the picture. It's like I can't get it back. So any interruption, it's like waking up from a dream, Doc. So I guess that's all we get this session. Doc looked down at his watch with a heavy, thinly veiled sigh. So Ben, do you want to talk about something different? Maybe about what brought you back this time, after so long? You were away from us for quite some time. I thought about it for a minute. I hadn't known where else to turn. This place had served as home for so long. I knew the campus like the back of my hand. It felt like second nature to come back when things started feeling strange. And I'd been doing just fine. Everything was going so well until she showed up again. No, Doc, I'm good. Thanks, I mumbled, heeding the gut instinct to keep my mouth quiet. I had to get out of here as soon as possible. I'd made a poor choice. I should have known this is what I would find. Nothing had changed. I looked around at the four walls surrounding us. Nothing at all. Doc pulled up the charts, reading again from them like some creepy religion. It says here, he pointed, the nurse wrote that you, quote, had seen her again, and she had seen you see her, and she looked like she'd been the one to see a ghost. He looked up from the chart again. I smiled through the building dislike. He was just doing what he was trained to do, right? A tickle of justice told me that wasn't the case, but it wasn't my business. Not yet. Right now I needed to get myself out of this mess, and I had to think quick. Doc, I've just been overworked lately. I took the night shifts and final exams are coming up. I think I've just been stressed. I need to kind of reset, you know? I think that's why I came back. Who is she? He repeated his question. Why were you repeating that sentence again and again when you first came into the lobby? The doctor's expression was firm. Benjamin, you realize we can't do this again, right? My ears perked. Again? This was the first time this had happened. Amber had only gone missing once. It was everyone else who'd acted strangely since her disappearance. Like it was nothing. None of what they were saying was adding up. It was like they were hiding something. I squeezed my eyes closed, trying to see past that moment at the base of the neon lights at the zipper, with her friends staring at me like they'd seen a ghost and gotten a whiff of something gross all at once. A migraine migrated from right behind my eyes to blaze at the front of my skull. It felt like my eyes were on fire. And then, all at once, a picture of her father began to rise. He'd barely opened the door to see me when I'd come knocking. That was it. I'd gone to tell him I was sorry, that if I'd done anything to upset Amber, I wanted to apologize in person. He'd stared at me blankly. In my memory, his eyes were blazing red, like he was under intense pressure or he'd been crying. Something shifted in his face while I watched the moment playing. I'd gone on to say I wanted to make sure she'd made it home safe and sound or something like that. Go home, kid. Go home, kid. I could faintly hear the echo of the last thing her father had said before shutting the door in my face. I'd been confused. A flash of pain pulsed through my mind. These migraines are exhausting. I inched an eye open. Through the blurred wince, I had seen Dr. Weisenheimer tapping his pen against his pad, still focused on his notes. I'd felt so bad about the interaction with her friends, and her running off on me. I'd thought about it all the way home. All the way home in my stupid teenage brain, I'd tried to figure out what had gone wrong. I kept coming back to the same conclusion. There was no way Amber Clayton was mad at me for not going through a stupid funhouse. It wasn't like her. And it wasn't like her to disappear forever. The picture blurred. Nothing after that made sense. I'd gone from the top of my class, an all-star athlete, to less than nothing. The one the witch hunt was turned against. I'd seen it happen so many times. I'd always felt a secret sense of relief that it was never me. And then as fast as lightning, it was. Somehow, within the span of a week of marriage counseling, my parents had been convinced by their pastor that my acting out throughout their relationship had caused a ripple that was tearing their bonds, and thus the spiritual fabric of the community and those close to them. Somehow they'd bought it. They'd explained it just like that to me, and blown my mind completely the day before I hopped on a plane to be sent away for the rest of my high school education, off to the same military school that had shaped my dad. I learned a lot that day. A lot about life, a lot about death, a lot about expectations. I watched my idea of family dying as the plane took off, leaving them at the gate, ready to glue themselves back together without me. The doc licked the tip of his pen before continuing. He waited for me to respond without wasting his time in between. Family. The word leaked in like the squeal of a violin string. Another term yet to be properly defined. I smiled bitterly through the moving blur of white coat and gray hair, sitting in front of my 1,000-mile stare. I had emancipated myself and taken up construction in the summers for the off-season of college, and I had done it for a reason. I hadn't stepped foot in that town since, but I hadn't known they felt so strongly against me, too. For some reason, that part stung. My cheeks burnt a little at the idea of making a fool of myself in public. That being a legacy didn't seem like something I'd bring a future wife or business partner home to. Doesn't really scream, pick me. You came here because it's the closest thing to home that you have right now. I nodded quietly, watching the doctor's hand scribble across the paper. When he finally stopped, I watched him sift through my rap sheet. My smile widened. I imagined him as the embodiment of the Sheriff of Nottingham, collecting another repeat customer with no other option. And he'd go home patting himself on the back, even though I'd basically just done his job for him. My face went wily, but I scrubbed it. And thankfully the doc wasn't paying attention. His story isn't my story. I chewed on the inkling. It isn't how I see it. It would be easy to see things his way if I hadn't lived in the character's shoes. I nodded again as the thought wrapped up. It finished with a decision that their narrative wouldn't find my answers for me. They'd rather cover them up, snow them in ruthless meds, so I'd have no choice but to see things their way. Let him win without pressure. Control yourself. Save it for the field, then. Don't escalate this. Say what he wants to hear. It was as simple as that. I just had to get myself out of the mess I'd gotten into. I could figure things out from there. Part of me felt the need to protect my honor from these vultures. That part was ready to open its mouth to defend. Comply. If their opinions don't matter, prove it. Put your money where your mouth is, Ben. I grimaced, accepting the challenge with a final yay. And with that final yay, I felt a sudden weight lift. Suddenly, I didn't care what they said, or thought, or labeled me with. They're a fly to swat later. The inkling finished. For now, there's work to do. A top secret mission to accomplish. One that requires me to keep my mouth shut. A rush of gratitude toward past experiences bubbled up in me. Strange ones. Ones that hadn't made sense until just now. Memories that had haunted me now felt more like a roadmap, and the shift was so sudden. It was strange. The places I'd been trained me well in keeping quiet, maintaining military bearing, taking in multiple viewpoints. I can do this. I bit my lip and nodded my head visibly toward the doctor. He looked up and hesitated to analyze my compliance. I pictured an internal white flag waving between us. I get it. Dr. Weisenheimer folded his hands under his chin, listening intently to my confession. I understand my behaviors have caused problems for people in the past. I really regret that, and I don't want to affect anyone like that again. I looked at the ground, accepting that as truth, while fighting the urge to roar liar in his imperious face. He repeated thoughtfully. So tell me this, are you still sure or convinced that who you saw was her, or Amber, that is? Anytime I open my mouth over what I've been through, I'm labeled insane and tossed back into the crazy train for reprogramming. I shook my head. Not today. I'm taking my time back. No, Doc, I think I was just overworking myself. I think the stress might have gotten to me, and some girl with similar features triggered that memory. I'm sure you're right, Doc. And do you remember discussing the situation surrounding the event with me? Or are you still having memory lapses? He raised an eyebrow. Enough of my story has been decided by other people. I've started a new life, and I'm sticking to that storyline, which happens to require me to be back to campus in time to finish my exams and hopefully study for them. I have to get out of here. When I didn't answer his question right away, he continued pounding in the nail. I just have to confirm this for my notes. Based on the story you told, Ben, was Amos you? And your date, was that a reference to Amber Clayton, who died at age 16 in a horrible car accident involving 4 other females? Everything inside me screamed toward the opposite. He was changing the narrative again. I didn't know what else to say, since it felt completely wrong, so I nodded compliantly. I guess I just missed her. That must have been why I snapped." The doctor leaned forward. "Is that why you, or Amos, came to the Claytons' home in the middle of the night on the anniversary of their daughter's death? Is that why you told them you'd lost her at the carnival and claimed you wanted to help her?" Everything screamed against my next answer. "Must be, Doc. It's the only thing that makes sense." "Well, you're a bright kid, Ben. You said you're studying, right?" I nodded. Good, he said. "Stay in school, and stay on your medications. Getting away from them can be dangerous, requires a medical professional's help. Don't forget that." "I haven't taken meds for years, Doc. And even then it was just for depression or something," I stated plainly. "Doesn't your magic book tell you that too?" I pointed toward my file. "I haven't been back here since graduation, and I promise I haven't been seeing anyone else." A bitter smile bubbled to the surface to be released between us. My most remorseful face followed after it. It didn't take much since I felt pretty miserable. The doctor eyed me. "Okay, Benjamin, I'll tell you what I'll do. Since this was partially voluntary, I'm going to release you under the condition that you take the medication I'm going to prescribe for you." I should have been more specific. He mumbled the last part under his breath while he scribbled over his prescription pad. "I'm going to give you one for sleeping. Sounds like you need more sleep. And one that acts like a mood stabilizer. Can we make that agreement, Benjamin? Will you take them religiously?" Dr. Weisenheimer looked up to meet my steel stare as he tore the first piece of paper away from his pad and reached it out to me. "Say yes, and I'll make the arrangements for your immediate release, but we'll have a follow-up to review your progress in, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks?" I slowly reached out and took the piece of paper. I could already feel the heavy weight of judgment and condemnation it passed along with it. Reminded me a lot of the black dot passed around by pirates. When I looked up at him again, all I could see was the devil, smiling back at me, teeth gleaming hungrily, while he waited impatiently for me to accept death's warrant. "I don't care what you think of me." The thought crossed my mind as I carried the label into my lap. I crossed my hands over the top of the prescription paper before I resigned my answer. "I think I can manage that, Doc. More sleep would be nice," I mumbled. Good. The doctor's teeth shone. Good. My, how quickly you've matured, Ben. I'm so impressed with your ability to grasp reality and control that anger. So good. Very impressive." I didn't like how he said that last part. I bit my tongue, nodding all the while. "Well, I'm glad we extended our session. I think we had some breakthroughs." He beamed with the first almost real emotion he'd exuded as he packed up his papers and replaced his pen in the front pocket of his doctor's coat. "I'll have the nurse at the front set up an appointment with you for 3 weeks from now. Until then, you take those." He tapped the prescription paper he'd given me as he passed by. "I'm trusting you to do the mature and right thing and take care of yourself, Ben. Don't make me look bad, okay? We don't want to make this mistake again, all right?" He patted my shoulder firmly. I did my best not to snarl back at him. He was right, though. About one thing, anyway. Coming here had been a big mistake I had no intention of making again. I had to find Amber. I had to figure out where she'd been. Something told me she had the answers to my questions. Only she could clear my name. To be continued. Hey, thank you for tuning in for the first part of the Funhouse. I'll have the next part out as soon as possible, and until then, I hope you have a beautiful week. Thanks for tuning in.